Here's the dog. I think, first of all, I need to say hello to the dog.
Hello, こんにちは。
Thank you. That's what we call my dog fix. This needs his... Can you hear? Yeah? Okay. Here? Okay. So, first of all, I give you a special greeting from Africa. Chimpanzee, me Jane. So I thought today I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to be doing what I'm doing now. I owe a huge debt of thanks to my mother. I had the most wonderful, supportive mother, and she supported the love of animals that I was born with. And when I was growing up, television had not been invented. There was no TV, no internet, no computers. I had books and nature. And I spent hours and hours outside. We had a big garden, and we were down near the sea. And I watched the birds and the insects, squirrels, climbed trees, all those things. Most of my books came from the library because we didn't have very much money when I was growing up. I used to save up my tiny bit of pocket money so that I could buy second-hand books. I was 10 years old when I found a little book that I could just afford, and it was called Tarzan of the Apes. Do you all know Tarzan? Yes? Well, of course, being a little romantic girl, I fell in love with Tarzan, and I was very angry because he went and married the wrong Jane. But that was when my dream began. I told everybody, I'm going to grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them. I never thought of being a scientist because girls didn't do that sort of thing back then. Everybody laughed at me. How will you get to Africa? You don't have money. Africa's a dangerous place full of fierce wild animals, and you're just a girl. But not my mother. She said, Jane, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity, and if you don't give up, I'm sure you'll find a way. So that's the message I take around the world, particularly young people in disadvantaged communities. And so many have written saying, Jane, thank you, because you've taught me, because you did it, I can do it too. Couldn't afford to go to university, got a job, had to have money. And so I was like 20 when I got a letter from a school friend inviting me to Kenya, where her parents had bought a farm. I was invited for a holiday. That was the opportunity. But first of all, I had to get the money to go to Africa. And so I got a job waiting on tables in a hotel, and it was very hard work. It took about 5 months to save up for a return fare to Africa by boat. That's how we went back then. So eventually I got to Kenya. I stayed with my friend, and somebody said to me, Jane, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Dr. Leakey, famous paleontologist. So I went to meet him at the Natural History Museum. He was curator, and he asked me so many questions about all the animals in the museum, the Natural History Museum. And because I'd read every book I could find about animals in Africa, not so many back then I could answer many of his questions. And anyway, he decided I was the person he'd been looking for to go and study not just any animal, but the one most like us. Back then, nobody had been studying chimpanzees in the wild. And so there was no protocol for me to follow. I was just sent off into the forest. It was difficult for Leakey to find money because everybody thought this was a stupid idea, a young girl going into the forest by herself. So eventually he found someone to give money for 6 months, and that was all he could manage, 6 months. The authorities wouldn't let me go alone. I had to go with someone, they said. So who volunteered? That amazing mother of mine. So every day I got up before light and went up into the forested mountains of Gombe National Park in Tanzania, and she stayed down looking after the camp. People say, "Oh, Jane, you were so brave going off into the forest by yourself." That was my dream. It was my mother who was brave, left in the camp with baboons with their big teeth, wanting to raid our food, and snakes and scorpions and all these creepy crawlies that she really didn't like. My big problem was the chimpanzees took one look at me and vanished into the forest. And this went on for 4 whole months. And I only had money for 6 months. I knew if I had time, I could get the chimpanzees' trust, but did I have time? Fortunately, one chimpanzee began to lose his fear, and he had beautiful white hairs on his chin, and I called him David Greybeard. So during those 4 months, my mother was an amazing support. She boosted me, telling me, "Jane, you found this peak, and with your binoculars, you're learning about the chimpanzees making nests at night, traveling by themselves in little groups, sometimes big groups, meeting when there's a new food ripe. You're learning about their calls and the foods they eat." So she made me feel better. So it was very sad that just 2 weeks after she had to leave came the breakthrough observation, and I just wished that she'd been there to share the excitement. It was David Greybeard, and on this very magical day, I saw him breaking off grass stems and using them as tools to fish termites from their nests. And I saw him break off leafy twigs, and to make that into a tool, he had to carefully remove the leaves. He was using and making tools. If you see that today, it wouldn't be exciting. We know many animals use tools. Back then, science had decided, European science had decided, that only humans used and made tools. And so that meant that Louis Leakey could go to the National Geographic with this exciting observation, and they agreed to fund my work when the 6 months' money ran out. So now I could relax, and gradually I got to know the other chimpanzees of the community. Gradually they began to lose their fear, and I got to know them almost like members of my own family, not just David Greybeard, but all his friends out there in the forest. And the most exciting thing was how like us they are. When they communicate, they do postures and gestures the same as us. They kiss, they embrace, they pat one another, they hold hands. Males competing for dominance stand upright and swagger like human male politicians. The way that the mothers raise their young, it's so like human mothers when they raise their young in the right way, that is supporting them like my mother supported me. Chimpanzee mothers do the same. Unfortunately, they also have a dark, aggressive side. They're capable of violence. They hunt and kill, and they have a kind of primitive war between neighboring social groups, and they kill. But like us, they also show love, compassion, and altruism. So an unrelated individual may adopt an infant whose mother has died and save its life, even if they're not related at all. So after I'd been with the chimpanzees about 1.5 years, Leakey writes a letter and tells me, Jane, you now have to get a degree because I want other scientists to take you seriously.
But remember, I hadn't been to college. And yet Leakey said, we don't have time for an undergraduate degree. I've got you a place in Cambridge University in England to do a PhD in animal behavior. So you can imagine I was nervous. And can you imagine what it felt like when these very high-ranking professors told me I had done everything wrong?
I shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. No David Greybeard, Flo, Goliath, Mike. I should have given them numbers. That was scientific. I couldn't talk about them having minds capable of solving problems. I couldn't talk about them having personalities. I couldn't talk about them having emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, despair. Why? Because those things are unique to human beings. This was in 1961, and I was utterly shocked. And fortunately, I had a wonderful teacher when I was a child who taught me that in this respect, these professors were wrong. And that teacher was my dog, Rusty. So how many people here have a dog, a cat, a horse, whatever animal, and know perfectly well that we are not the only beings on the planet with personalities, minds, and emotions? Come on, the hands up. How many of you? Any of you? Well, yes, because we are not the only beings on the planet with personalities, minds, and emotions. And thanks to the chimpanzees being so like us, not only behaviorally, but also biologically, science gradually came to understand that we are part of and not separated from the rest of the animal kingdom. Today, as many of you know, there is research going on into all kinds of different animals, proving that animals are sentient beings and can feel emotions. And any of you young people here, you can actually study animal personality. You can study animal intelligence. You can study even animal emotions. I could not have studied those things because I was told they didn't exist. Anyway, I got my PhD. I got back to Gombe. I built up a little research station. It was the best days of my life. I could spend hours and hours alone in the rainforest, understanding this complex mix of plant and animal species that make up the ecosystem of the forest. And while I was there, out in the rainforest by myself, I felt a very strong connection to a great spiritual power out there in nature. So why did I leave? Why am I now traveling the world 300 days a year, talking to people like you? Why? Because in 1986, I came to understand at a conference that right across Africa, chimpanzee numbers were dropping and forests were being cut down. I also learned from secretly filmed video how chimpanzees were tortured when they were trained to perform in circuses. I saw footage of chimpanzees in medical research laboratories in tiny cages by themselves for life. I knew I had to try and do something, but I didn't know what to do. I forced myself to go into the laboratories and see for myself the conditions there. Because if you want to talk about something that you believe is cruel, you need to see it with your own eyes so you can talk about it from actual experience. It began a long fight. Luckily, many NGOs joined in. Finally, we've got chimpanzees out of medical research everywhere. And I could talk for hours about why that's happened, but we don't have time. But what about Africa? What could I do about Africa? So I got together some money and I visited. By then, there were 6 other chimpanzee research sites in different parts of Africa. And so I learned a great deal as I went from one place to another about the problems faced by the chimpanzees, why their numbers were decreasing. There was destruction of habitat, the bushmeat trade, killing mothers to steal babies for selling to entertainment around the world, and pets. But I also learned about the problems facing so many of the African people who were living in and around chimpanzee habitat. I learned about the terrible poverty, the lack of good health and education facilities, the degradation of the land as people overused the farmland and had to move further into wildlife habitat. And then I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, where I began my research. And back in 1960, it was part of the great forest belt that stretched right across equatorial Africa. So by the late 1980s, when I flew over Gombe, I was shocked. I saw a little island of forest that was Gombe National Park, and all around were bare hills. There were more people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food from elsewhere. They were cutting down the trees in their struggle to survive, to have more land to grow more food, or to make money from charcoal or timber. And that was when it hit me. If we can't help these people to find ways of making a living without destroying their environment, we can't save chimps, forests, or anything else. So that's when we began a program called Take Care, or Takare, which is a very holistic program to help the people find ways of living without destroying the forest. And this program began in 1994 with me working with Mia's husband. So I will not go into this program now, but it's been unbelievably successful. We've got chimpanzees being protected in 104 villages throughout their range in Tanzania because of Takare. And that same program is now in 6 other African countries where JGI works to conserve chimpanzees and their habitat. So I can proudly say that because of Takare, there are chimpanzees alive today and forests that are growing today or being restored that would not be there without this program that we began in 1994. And the basic of it was not a group of arrogant white people moving into an African village and telling them what we were going to do to make their lives better. No, it was a group of local people who went in and listened to the elders and asked them, what can we do to make your lives better? It was the very first community-led conservation program in Africa, and it's worked. So in 7 African countries, there are people who understand that protecting the environment isn't just for wildlife, it's for their own future. We need the environment for our own survival. So while I'm traveling around the world, talking about the problems in Africa, trying to raise money for our programs, I'm also learning about the harm that we in the world are doing to the natural world. The most important thing is for people to understand we are part of the natural world and we depend on it for our survival. But what do we depend on? We depend on healthy ecosystems. And an ecosystem, as I learned in the forest, is a complex mix of plant and animal species dependent on each other. And those ecosystems are collapsing around the world. So when you look at what's happening in the world today, it's not surprising that so many people are losing hope for the future. Back in the early 1990s, I was beginning to travel around the world, and I was meeting young people like you here in front of me, and like university students, I think back there, who were losing hope. They were angry or depressed or just not seeming to care. And this was all over the world. So I was asking them, why do you feel like this? And they said, because you are harming our future and there's nothing we can do about it. So there are maybe some people in this room tonight who feel, yes, you've compromised our future and there is nothing we can do about it. And I said, yes, indeed. We have not only compromised your future, we've been stealing it since the Industrial Revolution. And we're still stealing it today with the big corporations that are going in and destroying the environment that you need for your future. But I totally believe we have a window of time in which, if we get together, we can slow down climate change, slow down loss of biodiversity, and start gradually to make the world a better place. I want to say, so that's when our Roots and Shoots program began, back in 1991, with the main message: every single one of us, everybody in this room, everybody in the world, every one of us makes an impact every single day, and we can choose what sort of impact we make. And it began with 12 high school students in Tanzania in 1991. It's now in 69 countries with members from preschool, university, everything in between. And it's not a top-down organization. It's where young people can choose what they want to do to make the world better in 3 areas: for people, for animals, for the environment. And it's changing lives all over the world. And people are writing to me and saying, the best thing I ever did was to join Roots and Shoots. Okay, well, so let's end up with, why are there reasons for hope? Because so many people have lost hope, are losing hope. So many people tell me it's too late, we've passed the tipping point. My first reason for hope is young people like you. Because when young people understand the problems and are empowered to take action, there is nothing that you cannot do. All around the world, young people are tackling problems, sharing their problems, communicating with each other through our Roots and Shoots program, changing the world. Secondly is the human intellect. The development of our intellect makes us more different than anything else from the other animals with whom we share the world. And I specifically say intellect rather than intelligence, because intelligent people don't destroy their world. I mean, we are beginning to work with our brains to solve some of the problems that afflict us, our planet today, like climate change, renewable energy, electric cars, and so on. So, and there are many more ways that scientists are using their brains to create ways of living in greater harmony with nature. And as individuals, and this is maybe even more important, we can think every day about our own environmental footprint. Are we making the world better as we live through a day? making it worse, we can choose. Okay, the next reason for hope. Nature is so amazingly resilient if we give her a chance. If you fly over Gombe National Park today, there are no bare hills. The trees have come back. Animals on the brink of extinction can be given another chance. You have two of the most amazing regenerations of nature in Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So my last reason for hope is what I call the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle seemingly impossible problems and won't give up. And that's why I travel around for 32 years with Mr. H. 32 years ago, Mr. H was given to me for my birthday by a man who thought he was giving me a stuffed chimpanzee. So I took his hand and I made him hold the tail. Gary, chimpanzees don't have tails. Gary Horn is blind. So Gary Horn went blind when he was 21. And learning to live in this new dark black world, he decided he wanted to become a magician. Everybody said, Gary, you can't be a magician if you're blind. Children don't know he's blind. He arranges his props beforehand, and he is magic. He does skydiving, scuba diving, and he's taught himself to paint. But when I told him that he'd not given me a chimpanzee, he said, never mind, take him where you go, and you know my spirit is with you. And it's not only humans who have this indomitable spirit, this will to live, and animals have it too. Finally, I want to say that I hope many of you here will want to join our Roots and Shoots program to help us make the world a better place. We have not so far been really successful in growing the program across Japan, although we have in other parts of the world, almost everywhere. So we have a wonderful team of Goodall Institute people here to follow up and come and see you and tell you more about the program. So I would like Kyoshi and Mina to come up here so everybody can see them, because they will stay here when I've gone and when Mia has gone too. So they will be here to answer your questions, to tell you how you can be part in our global movement to make the world a better place. There is hope for the future, but only if we take action. We can't just hope that hope will come. No. We have to roll up our sleeves and take action. And that's what JGI and Roots and Shoots is all about. And a big thank you to Mie, who's been with JGI for years and years and years, and for translating tonight. Thank you. And thank you all for coming and listening. And I'm sure you have questions, but, send in the questions and we'll jointly try to answer them. And all of you young people, I'm hoping that you're going to be part of Roots and Shoots and help us change the world for your children. Thank you.